All right, well, it's 3:30. Hopefully Tom will be able to join us. But the rolls show that everyone is here from the committee except Tom Quinn. Gary Steen, Chuck Maves, Brian Johnson, Kelly McCulloch, Diane Morehouse, Jim Tripp, Jim Anderson, Vaughn Hedlund, Tom Quinn, and myself, David Bartlett, and other staff. Approval of the minutes. We have two.
I so move.
For both
I'll
of them?
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
For
for both of them. Yes.
Okay. Any discussion on either one of the minutes? If not, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Krista, do you have any public comments, or does anybody else?
I didn't receive any.
Okay, thank you. County managers report. Review the draft February 16th, 2022 county board agenda.
You've got the draft agenda in your packet of materials. One item under report of the county manager we'll be talking about here later in this meeting regarding the legislative agenda. I don't know if we're going to have a legislative agenda meeting, but we'll talk about that. We'll get reports, annual reports from the county clerk, from transit, and from the medical examiner. As always, are there any chairs of standing committees that wish to make a verbal report to the county board at the meeting?
Well, County Manager Paul Miller, we do have, I think you already have it on the agenda for the action that we took at our CR&T meeting, right?
Yes, that
Yes,
is
that's covered.
action coming from this committee, yes.
Right, thank you.
If there's no reports, though, oral reports from the chairs of the standing committees, the other items that will be on there, we will be talking about later in this meeting, but two ordinances from the PR&D committee and potentially two from this committee is what we have scheduled. Is there any other items of business or announcement that we should put on the agenda for the February 16 meeting? That concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, items placed at the request of the chair. There's non-consideration of actions to be taken by the executive committee. 22 legislative agenda presentation. Mr. Miller asked me about this, and I said we should put it on this agenda and talk about it. We've had in the past, as you know, a meeting for the legislators. I think it's worked out well. I don't know if we want to skip this year or if we want to do that. We have a legislative agenda for 2022. There's items in there from a couple from judicial, I think about 9 from land use. Health and Human Services has quite a few. And nursing homes, financial, road and highways. You know how we've done it in the past. Should we try to set up a date for that, or we probably usually would have had a date set up already and sent out invitations already for this. Supervisor Johnson.
I think honestly, it's a real good meeting to have, but I'm concerned about the poor attendance that we have from our elected officials, to be honest with you. It doesn't seem like I know they're busy. I understand that. With lobby days all the time, but I'm just concerned with that personally.
Yeah, I understand. I totally understand where you're coming from at that. Although last year, I think we had more participate than we ever have. Janet Bewley was the first time she participated. I think Senator Bernier did too also, didn't she? If I remember right. She had never participated before. Seems like we might have lost one in there also. I don't know that Ken, the fellow from Baldwin, Rob
Staffhold.
Yeah, I don't think he participated this last year, and he had
No.
years before. So I guess it just depends on what they have going, at that time. I've thought a lot about this. I think it's good, but I've also wondered if like a few that are interested in legislative stuff would just make an appointment to go meet with them when they're in their home territory, if that would be better. I don't know. Supervisor Quinn.
Yeah, I think we did have pretty good attendance last year. And I think it was Jeff Smith who was sick, and if I remember correctly, and couldn't make it. But I'd argue in favor of having the meeting, and maybe thinking a little bit about our strategy going in. We talked at our last meeting or at a previous meeting about the sort of situation we find ourselves in with regard to levy limits and state funding and that sort of thing. And it seems like I would argue that if we do it, we should make sure that we have prepared a pretty thoughtful presentation on what our position is, on what's wrong with that system and why it needs to be changed. And maybe try and get some publicity about that position rather than just a list of, well, I think it's good. Whatever we do, I think it's good. I think we should do it.
Supervisor McCullough.
So I'm not entirely convinced about how well it works, but I think that if we are going to do it, and I think we probably should, the way to do it is the way we have done it, because that we are then speaking with the voice of the full county board. We're having a meeting in a way that lets our legislators know that we're very serious about it and that we are very interested in having that conversation with them, and having the meeting lends a lot of weight to that conversation.
Supervisor Steen.
Yes, I share Brian's concern about the lack of response sometimes, but I feel that I would be in favor of having the meeting. And sometimes I would say we'd want to make it a kind of an annual thing so that it's, I'm afraid if we get out of sight, out of mind is what I'm afraid of. So I think it's good to raise our concerns, and I'd be in favor of it.
Sounds like the majority are in favor of continuing it. So, timing. It's an election year. Do we want to wait until after that? Do we want to try to squeeze it in soon? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, on the timing of it.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
There's benefits of waiting a little bit until after the election. There'll be some new county board supervisors. And those of us that won't be on anymore probably wouldn't be able to contribute a whole lot. I think maybe I would look at a time when they aren't in session and then do it sometime so that the entire board and the new elected supervisors can be involved.
You're right. There's definitely going to be some new ones on the board, no matter what happens, even if everybody's reelected. Mr. Miller.
Just a consideration on the timing. It's a very good point that we've got an election coming up. The flip side of that consideration is whether or not the new board would endorse the same set of legislative items. These legislative items reflect the current board.
That is true.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Supervisor Morehouse.
if at all possible, I would like to suggest that we look at a legislative calendar, because I think that's part of the reason why we've had such poor participation. We can do it when they're out of session. And I of course don't have that, but I'm sure it's available.
I think we could.
I can speak to that. What we have done in the past, Supervisor Morehouse, is we do coordinate with the legislators to make sure we're not bumping into things that they've already scheduled now. So we've managed to avoid when they're in session, because that doesn't work for them. There have been events. I remember one with Shackner where she couldn't attend because she was attending an event there in Madison. But in doing this before a date is finalized, your staff will coordinate with the elected representatives to make sure it does not conflict with when they're in session.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'd like to get past the question of whether we should do it sooner before the election or after the election. I think there's some benefits having the new board be involved in it, but as Mr. Miller pointed out, this is the agenda for this board. So I understand, I can see both sides of it, but I think we decide if we want to do it before the election or after, and then we concentrate on when they're not in session and going from there. Supervisor Hedlund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, if possible, I would like to see it prior to the new board, simply because, if we have 5-6 new members, they're not going to be able to weigh in very much at first, at least, on what the departments or committees they may be assigned to, why we have chosen such an agenda. And so I think that, it wouldn't hurt if it was later, but I guess if possible, I'd like to see it ahead of time.
Supervisor Quinn, and then Supervisor McCullough.
I'd speak to having it if as soon as possible, as soon as practical. Seems like we have the agenda laid out. We should go and present it.
Supervisor McCullough.
Yeah, I was going to suggest as soon as possible as well.
Okay.
Because if we wait until after the election, I think we would probably want to wait until fall, because we would need to get the new supervisors to have time to orient themselves and sort out all of the new committee assignments and possibly look at new agenda.
All right, well then we will, it sounds like the majority of everybody would rather do it sooner than later. So we will work on that. We're going to have to come up with we usually had about 5 major points that, some supervisor, who's ever the chair of that committee, would usually read. So when do we want to come up with picking those points? I realize we probably can't do it today because not everybody has the agenda in front of them, I doubt.
If I may suggest, Chairman.
Yes.
Bartlett. Okay. In the past, what we've done is we have the legislative agenda broken out into categories, judicial, financial, et cetera. And so that sort of recommends itself to who would speak. Nursing home would be, Supervisor Johnson. Judicial kinds of issues would be Supervisor Tripp, et cetera. And what we've done in the past is your staff has prepared, working with those particular ones, has prepared a narrative that can be read. I think what I would recommend is we do much the same this time. Key staff can reach out to the chairs. We can zero in just on the way we've categorized our legislative agenda items. Now, we don't want to do more than 5 or 6 at the risk of talking too much. We want to hear from them as well. But we can reach out and help come up with a narrative and simply, we can distribute this. It doesn't need to be at another meeting. We can distribute the ideas and the people who would speak to the committee to let you know how it's going to roll out. If anybody has any major objections, they could reach back to staff so that we're not running athwart of a rolling quorum in a meeting. They can reach back to staff with any concerns or alternative ideas. That way we keep this moving forward. I would also go ahead and recommend either February 28 or March 7. Now, looking at our regular schedule of meetings, if we try to do it later in March, March 14 is 2 days before our regularly scheduled March meeting. March 21st would only be a few days after our regular scheduled March meeting, and March 28 is getting awful close to the actual election day.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. To your point, I believe there'd be about 7 people speaking if we had somebody speak to all the headings. And I guess we've usually held that down to about 5. That's why I was asking about how we would decide which 5, but I'm fine with going with 7. I'm fine with, every chair having something to speak about. And the finance, probably Supervisor Steen being vice chair. But I'm fine with that. If that's fine with the rest of you, is have a couple of more people speaking than we normally do. Is that good? All right. All right, so 28th, shoot for that and see if they're open. If they're not open, we'll go back to a different date. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
That's our plan. Mr. Miller, will you talk to the department heads then and instruct them to meet with or to come up with something and meet with their individual chairs?
Yes, and
financial, who's going to work with Mr. Steen? Maybe you or Beata?
Yeah. And we also, importantly, at the same time, we'll reach out to the legislators right away and make sure that we'll reach out to their staff, make sure that they're available.
Right.
We always send them a copy of the legislative agenda. We want them to be aware of what we're going to talk about. So we'll hopefully get an answer that date works for them before we spend a lot of time working on the narratives. But yes, we'll take care of all of that, Chairman Bartlett.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. Moving on then. Consideration of reports, resolutions, and ordinances coming to the county board from the executive committee. A resolution approving a budget adjustment for the district attorney's office. So I need a motion for this. Supervisor Tripp moves.
I second.
Supervisor Steen seconds. All right. And speaking to this, I know it's changed a little bit. Supervisor Tripp, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to turn this over to Andre to explain the nuances, but and it has changed a little bit. The amount of money requested is significantly lower. But basically, I just wanted to outline the committee's position when we recommended this to the executive committee. And that is, this is a really difficult time for hiring. It's difficult finding qualified candidates. It's difficult convincing them to come to work for you. And that's part of the issue. The other part of the issue is we're in a situation where we had a retirement in the district attorney's office. It was unexpected. Therefore, you can't budget for that stuff ahead of time. And it's in a position that's crucial to the successful operation of that office. If those factors had not been in place, then we would have taken the good advice of staff, which is to go through the normal process of hiring within the budget that we've got. We see this as a little bit of an exceptional circumstance, and we see the need as being significant enough to take this step. Thank you.
Okay. Andrea, do you want to add to that, please?
Yes, thank you for the time and for taking this or hearing me out on this. I did have my office manager resign unexpectedly due to some health matters and childcare issues. She was amazing to work with and did an unbelievable job. However, I do not have the funds in my budget to cover health insurance. She was under her husband's health insurance, which was, I think, a big benefit to the county. But unfortunately, I don't have the funds. I'm pretty much bare bones as it is. And I know that the best practice for finance is not to follow a budget adjustment like this, but this is one of those cases where I think that kind of the best practice doesn't align with the reality and the needs of my office to continue to have smooth operations. I worked with administration, and I don't believe keeping this position vacant until I have the funds to cover the cost of health insurance is a feasible option. I think when my staff are overworked and all working overtime, mistakes happen, and mistakes in my line of work could end up very poorly for the county as a whole, as well as financially if documents are missed in the middle of a trial. So I was originally asking for full-time health insurance benefits. An applicant I interviewed has now taken a job elsewhere. So I went back to more interviews and found another qualified applicant. There were only 5 that were allowed, but I think this one has some good potential. And so the cost I'm looking for is $10,140.48. That is the cost for single health insurance. And I just, unfortunately, my budget is bare bones as it is. I've cut everything I can every year. It seems like, we've had a 0 price increase. And so that's the amount I need to fill the position.
Any questions? Any other speaking to Mr. Miller?
Yes, I think the committee may wish to hear from Heather Murray, our HR director, and Beata Haug, our CFO.
Sure. Either one of you want to speak to this? Heather, go ahead.
Sure. So there were a couple of factors that went into the review of this. The individual, when this request started, that was selected was actually requesting compensation above the salary grid. And so you'll recall, we just adopted a salary grid, and the max top step 11. This individual was requesting compensation above that because they were in a different county position that earns a higher compensation rate. So that also was taken into consideration. I will note with the updated candidate that's been presented, Human Resources did some costing yesterday, and there actually are funds available regardless of the health insurance. We certainly look at the candidate and the candidate's experience and knowledge that they're bringing and make decisions based on that. It feels a little bit early in the year to really know where compensation from a budgetary standpoint is going to fall. You never know if there's going to be other vacancies or other things that might occur that will create open dollars within a department budget. So I would recommend that we hold off on any budget adjustments at this time. There is a cost savings again with the candidate that is being selected, regardless of benefit package. And that gives some room within the steps within the salary group that is established as well. I presented that costing to Beata so she can confirm or tell me that I was off on my costing, but I would encourage holding off and then doing a review later in the year to make sure that we're within budget and considering that transfer at that time if needed.
Okay, Beata, do you want to add to that, please?
Yes, thank you. I did review Heather's cost analysis. So to sum it up, the actual what was budgeted in 2022 for the position that for the individual that retired, with the new candidate coming on board, if they were to be offered within, how can I say this? They are currently getting a set salary. So if they were to roll into that position, that would still be an increase for them in a salary, but it will still fit within what was originally budgeted in 2022 in that vacant, for that person that was there had they not been retired. So that's what Heather is saying, is that holding off on making any budget adjustment because there is that switch in savings. Am I correct, Heather? Correct me if I. And I did review the budget for 2022, and I will echo the DA's office that, you know, they did cut in their budget in 2022 in their operations, but their salaries and fringes increased.
Supervisor Steen.
Yes, I'm a little confused here. Am I hearing the same request from Jim and the DA as I am from Heather and Beata?
You can call me B.
If I may clarify.
I can go
Mr.
by
Chair.
B.
If I may clarify, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
The assessment by HR and our CFO is that the DA office, that the DA's budget for 22 has adequate funds for the new candidate, including that candidate's health insurance, without the need for a budget adjustment. Later on in the year, should actual expenses prove to exceed the budget, would be the appropriate time to consider a budget adjustment.
So we're having Jim and the DA ask for it now, is that correct, or what?
They are asking for it now, and the
Okay, I
recommendation
understand.
from the other two is not.
I understand now. Thank you.
Andrea, go ahead.
Yeah, this is news to me. I mean, my salary and fringe increased from 2021 to 2022 due to changes in personnel and victim witness. But I don't believe I'm replacing a new employee who didn't have health insurance with one who wants health insurance. And so for me, that's an additional cost of $10,000 that I don't have extra in my budget. So I guess I wasn't provided with any details from finance or HR as to where they're coming up with these dollar amounts, but certainly the previous hire, she did not retire. So those retirement funds are for a different employee in this office. So those funds are not available. This was an unexpected vacancy, not a retirement. And then the current hourly rate I could see might be $1 less, but I don't know if that's enough to come up with a $10,000 change. So I guess if the county is fine with me hiring without this budget adjustment, I'm completely happy with that. I just was told I was unable to fill a candidate until it filled within my my budget, and I didn't allot for health insurance. So I'll defer to you as to how you want to handle it, but that was the reason for my request.
I can tie some numbers to that to kind of help clarify, and I apologize for the confusion. Now, my understanding is that for this particular position for 2022, it was budgeted at approximately 76,000. I'm just rounding the numbers. Now, this new individual coming on board, if we offer them a specific step, that would be regardless of, it can be at the lowest step, which starts at 58, and being at a step 5 at a highest would be at a 64,000. And so this is where we're comparing the numbers. It's all going to be based on at what hourly rate is being offered for this new individual.
Supervisor Tripp.
With the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to respond to Supervisor Steen. It was the understanding of the committee, and my understanding at least, that there was not money in the budget. The information that we heard here just a little bit ago was new to me as well. And that may be that I had an incomplete understanding of the issue prior to that. But I think the committee very clearly thought that there was no money in the DA's budget to account for this change in a position. So it's not that we're asking for something now that we could have delayed.
Yeah, and I want to clarify too, is last time we've met, things have changed since. The individual that was originally going to be in that role, the salary was higher, but that individual has since accepted a different position. So there is another internal candidate that if they were offered this position, that would still, would be higher. It would still be a promotion for them for this second candidate. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Andrea, did you have something to add or?
Yeah, so I'm not provided the information that HR has with, what each cost for every employee is. I think we used to get PEP sheets. I don't think we get those anymore. But my understanding is the previous employee earned $29.03 per hour, which would mean the salary for that position was $60,382. So that's why I'm confused as to how Beata is saying it was budgeted for 76,000. So I don't, so maybe Heather can explain that.
Maybe, go ahead, Heather.
Excuse me. So a couple of things here just to walk this back a little bit. If in complete honesty, I found out about this particular request and the change in the request to be able to pull the costing together yesterday afternoon. So normally we're involved kind of upfront on what that cost looks like. But I believe this particular candidate came to light yesterday afternoon or at some point in time slightly before that. So I did not have an opportunity to reach out to Andrea and go through the numbers. So that's where some of this last minute change is coming from. Again, going back to the previous candidate, which is where this started from, that particular candidate was not even on the pay grid. So the discussion, as I understood it prior to this going to judiciary and law, and I apologize, I've only been a part of this in pieces, was that the wage that was requested to be offered, which is generally my involvement when I'm asked about kind of where things fall with the request to make an offer, was above the salary grid. And so realistically, the candidate, we don't have a plan in place to pay at that level, even outside of health insurance. So health insurance aside, the candidate, the request was to offer above that. And that was my understanding of kind of that reasoning of why we couldn't really work towards that particular candidate. Now, the health insurance wasn't budgeted either, but again, I would say that that's something that we should review later in the year because there's a lot of things that happen throughout the year. And so to reconcile now when we don't know what's going to happen throughout the year, it seems early in the process. And so from the number standpoint, absolutely, we can circle back with Andrea, go through everything. But at this point, twofold, from what we're calculating based on the numbers that we have and what we understand is budgeted, there is not a need for a transfer now to cover the cost. And I would also just recommend, again, even if there is, say, that $10,000 shortfall, that we wait until later in the year to make sure that we truly need those funds transferred over. That's just my recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Tripp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I understand this correctly, and if Andrea is amenable, I would suggest that she just go ahead and make the hire. We deal with whatever shortfall in the budget occurs later. And in that case, I withdraw my motion.
All right.
If that's indeed the case. Andrea, I'd like some response from you on that, if you would, please.
My main concern is just, I need the position filled. So if this means I can fill the position, I'm very thankful. So I'm happy to withdraw the motion as long as I can fill the position.
Was there a second?
Yes.
Yes, there was. And I think it was Supervisor Steen. Did you second that?
At committee level, if he withdraws his second, that would be okay. But otherwise, generally, if there's a motion and a second, it belongs.
Yeah, we have to vote.
But if he withdraws the second, at least, at this level, it would be fine. I just want to make sure that it's done.
I'll withdraw my second if that's.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Heather, do you want to respond to that? It's definitely okay for them to fill that position then with this person?
Yes, so per policy, an offer anywhere between range step 1 and 3, Andrea, you can make that offer. Otherwise, request County Manager Miller if you want to go above step 3 and just getting that approval prior to that offer.
Supervisor Steen.
Yeah, this is for Andrea. Does this work for you if we do it this way?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Then my second question is, if and when we have to have the additional money, we don't have to reinvent the wheel again, do we? I mean, we should be ready to move forward with that at a pretty straightforward basis, right?
Yes, I would think so.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, it sounds like we're ready to move on then. Any other discussion? All right. 8B is a resolution authorizing the use of Arpa funds for rural broadband projects. I need a motion. Supervisor Anderson moves. Supervisor Quinn seconds. Speaking to this, Supervisor Anderson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we had a special meeting last Monday. We've been kicking the can down the road quite a while because they're a timing issue. Some of the ISPs are applying for some of the $1 million state grant right now for and that is due on March 17th, before the day after our next county board meeting. So it was important that we had a meeting ahead of this meeting, so that whatever your decision is, then it could go on to the county board meeting if approved a week from tonight. And after a great deal of discussion and everything, and then I'm going to ask you if Supervisor Tom Quinn can speak to this, because he did a large sum of work on this and has been very instrumental in getting this fruition and this resolution before us. But before I say that, let me just say, originally it started out by looking at, we were 24/7, which is kind of provides what we call the donut hole around Menominee for fiber. And they were applying for 5 different grants. And when I talked to Tom Quinn about this, I said, you know, I know that Bloomer Telephone is applying for a grant in the township of Grant. And I know that Mosaic is applying for a grant in the township of, excuse me, Bloomer and Colfax, and Mosaic in the township of Grant. And all of them, of course, should be included then. So this is why we're bringing you this resolution before you and hoping that you will approve some ARPA funds up to the amount of 100,000. Now, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Tom Quinn to follow up on this a little bit because he did a lot of work.
All right, Supervisor Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think is keep in mind that we thus far don't have a procedure in place in the county for allocating ARPA funds other than a direct vote by the board on the budget or whatever. So what this resolution does is provide a kind of a special process for dealing with this short-term, primarily with this short-term funding request. We have this funding cycle that's coming up. There would be a clear benefit for the applications if the county were able to provide some level of funding for it. So what we're proposing as a committee is that rather than try and put the whole ARPA thing together and maybe ask for, I don't know, even more money, let's focus on, for now, let's focus particularly on this next cycle and have the county board authorize the expenditure up to a certain amount. And then also authorize the CR&T committee to work with administration to develop the proper procedures for evaluating proposals as they come in and allocating funds and making sure the contracts are properly signed. So that's what this would do. It would give us a sort of a bridge process that would allow us to use ARPA funds in a limited way to deal with this really kind of unique opportunity that we have coming up.
Supervisor Anderson, you are muted, but Supervisor Morehouse is first. Go ahead, Supervisor Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Supervisor Quinn, I do understand that this is sort of a partial request, but can you enlighten us as to why the $100,000 amount was selected?
Yeah, we talked about different amounts, and it was suggested that maybe we ask for a larger amount. And I think that a reasonable case could be made for that we may want down the line. There may be for other broadband requests that come our way. There's a whole round of federal funding that's now to come up as far as part of the infrastructure thing. I think our hope was that since this was sort of since we don't have a formal process in place, and this was a pretty short-term decision by the committee to try and meet this deadline, it would be prudent to ask for enough that we felt would be confidently enough to address the applications that the providers are going to put in March. Understanding that, and then provide a process for that happening through the committee. Understanding that in late March, early April, we are planning as a board to have our capital expenditure discussion. And that if a larger amount were felt to be needed, that might be the place to have that discussion. That's my feeling. I'm not sure if everyone on the committee agreed with that, but that was my argument.
Mr. Chairman, may I follow one?
Yes,
comment
go
on
ahead,
it?
Supervisor Anderson.
Thank you. One of the other things that we strongly took into consideration was looking at all of the townships that were applying their ARPA funds toward these broadband, and that's all fiber. And when we looked at what the townships were doing, that's much greater. Most of them were applying all of their ARPA funds. Now, so we aren't talking about matching. All we want to do is to show us strong partnerships with these townships, county, township, by saying, yes, we think we can take some of our ARPA funds and apply, and it looks good on the grant application when you have townships and counties contributing, and we think it greatly helps them and to get these grants in the future. So the $100,000 would be divided, and we'll work up the formula, would be divided between whichever one of these 7 grants. If all of them get accepted, then we'll divide it between these 7. If they don't, we will prorate it. We won't use all of the 100,000. So we will be fair. And I think townships will be very happy with what we would do if we approve this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Maves.
Yeah, I guess I'm a bit confused based on what you just said there, Jim, as far as that this money would be allocated after the grants were awarded. And maybe I misunderstood what you said, because if it's allocated after the grant is awarded, then it can't help get the grant because it comes after the award. So did I misunderstand?
No, I think what Supervisor Anderson meant to say is if the grant wasn't granted, if they didn't get the grant, we wouldn't spend it, we wouldn't give them the money.
Right.
But okay, yeah, I understand that. But what I guess my question is, if we're not putting money up front, then how can it help get the grant? Because a statement was made that by working with the towns, because they're putting their money in, the county puts their money in, it looks better, even though and maybe they've changed the grant process. But I remember going to a meeting up at Stanton Town Hall when the state people were there saying the monies that the locals put up doesn't actually help that much in the grant process. There are different criteria that they go through, and I don't even know what the new criteria is. But I guess I need either I misunderstood or because somebody help clear it up.
Supervisor Quinn.
Yeah, I think what will happen is that this process, if it's approved, will mean that the ISPs will provide the CRNT committee with an application for funds, a specific amount. And that application will delineate the services they're going to provide, the amount of money they're putting in, the amount of money, if any, the town is putting in, and then the amount of the grant from the state. And the CRNT in this process will look at each one of those grants and make a decision about how much or if any of that contribution from the county will be provided to that particular grant. Then those grants go to the state, and the state will make decisions on each individual grant separately. And if the grants are awarded, then there'll be a process where the county will arrange to provide the funds, half of the funds provided up front and half at the completion of the project, and contracts will be signed. If the grants are not approved, then the commitment will be void and the money won't be spent.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, yes, Supervisor Steen.
I would just say that I'm in favor of this. I've been contacted several times by the town of Grant. They're kind of waiting to see what we're going to do. I think it's time for us to do something. And if I'm understanding the thing correctly, Chuck, the county is committing to spend up to 100 grand. So that if the county takes that move, that means that that's committed. It doesn't mean you're going to spend it, but they're willing to spend that amount, which lends itself to the overall success of the process, I think. So I'm in favor of it.
Anyone else before we vote? Supervisor Johnson.
From what I'm hearing, I understand you're expecting 7 apps for this. Is that correct? Jim Anderson or Tom?
That is correct. 5 from 24/7, 1 from Mosaic, and that's your town, that's Grant, and 1 from Bloomer Telephone, that's Township of Colfax.
Okay, thank you.
Any other speaking? Not, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. It'll move on to county board. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving down to number 9, review of reports, resolutions, and ordinances coming to the county board from the standing committees. First one is from the Planning, Resource, and Development Committee, a resolution denying a rezoning petition in the town of Sherman. Supervisor Quinn.
Do you want a motion?
No, this one goes straight from your committee to county board.
Okay.
But this is when you would report on it. Would you like to report on that, or would you like Ann?
Maybe I will speak a little bit on it, if that's okay.
All right.
And Ann asked to do it. So. And my only comment would be that this is a request to convert parcel from general ag to commercial, and the committee felt like, so it's a kind of a complicated situation, but the committee felt like there were several reasons why this was problematic, and that there were in fact, Ann can talk about that, but I think also that there were other potential solutions other than rezoning it that we could explore with the property owner.
All right. Ann, would you like to add something to that, please?
Sure. So I think, when it came down to it, the main reason that the zoning division recommended denial of this one was the density, scale, and use of the proposal did not fit the neighborhood's development pattern. At the time, it's trending toward residential. The town of Sherman doesn't actually have a future land use plan in place right now, unfortunately. I'm not really sure what else you'd like to hear from me.
Well, it's laid out pretty well in our thing, and is there any questions? Supervisor Johnson.
Yeah, I was just wondering if they zoned it R1, they cannot park their commercial implements there. Is that correct?
That's correct. The request for this one was to go from general agriculture to general commercial. And I think the intent of that was so that they could use this property for commercial storage. They already have a property adjacent that is zoned as general commercial.
Go ahead, Supervisor Johnson.
I understand that, but I see there's general ag just to would be the east of it. Then right after that, it's residential. What I'm just asking is, and I'm not saying anything has to change now, but could they have it zoned R1 and then park their implements there, or no?
As the ordinance is currently written, commercial storage cannot be done on a residential property or a general ag property.
Thank you.
Supervisor Quinn, you'd like to add something to
Well,
this?
just like to add a little context maybe. Yeah, they would not be allowed to store, you're not allowed to store equipment like that on a resident R1 zone property. In fact, they are right now using a R1 zone property that they own to do that, and they're going to have to discontinue that use to be in compliance. But I think what we have talked about, and it's not really part of this resolution, but just because you asked Supervisor Johnson, there are generally in county ordinances, zoning ordinances, as provisions for what they call contractor storage permission, where you could use a general ag zoning to do contractor storage, provided you got a special exception and provided certain screening and certain things like that. So it wouldn't be a permanent shift to commercial, and it wouldn't allow the kind of multiple future uses of commercial that could be a problem down the road.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Supervisor Headland.
Yeah, a question I have is, if something like that took place where a special exception is done, and in the future, the owner wanted to sell his business to someone, would that exception follow through for the same business, or does that end that exception?
I'll let Ann answer that.
Ann, can you answer that?
Well, in my past experience, yes, it would go with the property as long as everything remained the same. However, I don't know how it's written for Dunn County. I would guess that it's similar.
It is.
If I may offer to, yes, it
Yes,
is.
go ahead,
And in
Mr.
fact, the only way that it would not go, the special exception would not go with the property, is if there was a condition that said, upon its sale to a different entity, the special exception ceases.
Thank you. Any other questions on this?
I'm sorry, but I have one more.
Go ahead, Supervisor Johnson.
Is it all, I see there's a retaining pond on there. Is that okay in general ag?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
for,
Go ahead, Ann.
yeah, that's fine. That's pretty common. I mean, there's no ordinance against having a retaining pond in general ag.
Any other questions to this one? If not, we will discuss it more at county board. 9B, ordinance approving a rezone in the town of Tanner. Supervisor Quinn, would you like to explain this, or?
I think it's pretty straightforward. Ann, why don't you explain why you recommended this?
So this one was done, they asked for the rezone with the intent of selling part of the property to a neighbor. In order to create that, they would need to have the same zoning for the two properties. I also looked into the future land use plan for this property, and it was indicated as residential, so it fit with that, and there were no other environmental concerns or concerns with farmland preservations for this one.
Any other questions? Any questions? Not all right. Reports from the standing committees.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, oh, Supervisor
Yeah.
Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a comment to make, as far as both of these rezones were in my district, and I was not even aware of the hearings being held. In the past, I was always notified, and I assume all other supervisors have been notified when there were rezones in their districts. So I guess I'm just going to ask the question is maybe in the future that either via mail or email or some form of communication, that whenever there's rezones going on, that the supervisors of those districts are made aware of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure Ann will jot that down, try to do that in the future. Anything else? If not, moving on to item 10, reports of the standing committees. I will go across the board again like I see them. Supervisor Headland. Admin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our committee on administration last met Thursday, the January 27th. We had a number of actions, none of which were moving forward to this committee. But in terms of information we received from staff, we did approval of an out-of-class pay. It was a temporary situation where we actually have one of our finance people realistically doing 2 jobs. And then on top of that, they're also probably performed some training of our new CFO. So we did agree to that one. I think was very appropriate to do that. We had, of course, a consideration of vouchers. There were some questions, nothing major, but all of those questions that did come up were very well answered by our previous CFO to the members of the committee. And some of them actually stem from the fact that there are some really strange names out there for some of the vendors you can buy from these days, companies who are offering equipment or services under names that would make it sound like, why is that department buying from this particular vendor? But again, those were appropriately answered. Again, we have nothing coming forward to this committee. Our next meeting will be February 24th. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Anderson, CR&T.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I don't have much because on our January 10th meeting, I reported on that. And we just talked about the special meeting that we had 2 days ago on Monday regarding the only action was what we talked about earlier. So our next meeting is Monday. And at that particular time, we will focus on rural tourism and get our reports from our extension people. And so I'll be happy to report to you next month after we have this meeting. But we did have one resignation in extension, which is difficult. Stephanie Hintz, who has been a part of our extension family here for a long time, will be leaving as of April 1st. And that's a tough blow, but we hope that we can get her replaced. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Mays, facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as on facilities, it's basically business as usual in most situations. The fair board report, the fair is getting ready to gear up and start weighing in animals and stuff. As far as the facilities fleet, the new cars have finally gotten here, the new Malibus. And so they're ready to go. Again, we're requesting that all departments treat the cars with respect, and when they leave the cars, leave them cleaner than when you found them, because that always has been an issue, and that's kind of starting to pop up its ugly head again. But so anyway, as far as energy, we did get spreadsheets made as far as we're going to start tracking the energy use in all buildings and what we can do to save energy and to make it more efficient. So that's moving forward. We're still meeting with the Rotary Club as far as the accessibility tracked wheelchair. That's still in the works. We did have discussion on camping in the county parks, the outlying parks, and we need to get together with corporate counsel to get some answers taken care of there. We're looking at doing some wood cutting up at the Boyceville Range, thinning out the pines and stuff. We also had a discussion about, there was a contract as far as on the the 911 tower in the rec park. As far as the contract, we were updated, had been renewed with AT&T. And a discussion dealt around the fact that that type of, should that actually go through, be assigned to a specific group, whether it be facilities, admin, judicial law, as far as just for another review, not that we think anything went wrong, it's good it got taken care of, but just one of those things that maybe we should clean up and assign to a committee. The discussion was held on that. And our next meeting will be February 23rd. That's my report.
Thank you. Supervisor Tripp, judicial.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Judiciary and Law Committee met on January 24th. The only action we took was the resolution that we presented and then withdrew a little bit ago. Other than that, reports from the departments were pretty standard issue stuff. Just a couple of things I want to highlight because you may see them coming up down the road. Emergency Management and Communication has signed on with the state of Wisconsin for a long-term project that involves the Wiscom radio network. That involves some capital expenditures that are in our capital expenditure plan over the next several years. And Melissa Gillenbach has been notified recently that the state might be changing directions on that. So the state kind of does what they want to do, and the counties struggle to tag along as best we can. But just a heads up that coming down the road, if the state makes significant changes in their commitment to Wiscom, that might mean some changes that we would likely have to make as well. And right now, we already have money programmed into the long-range capital budget, but there could be some changes there. The other thing that you're likely to hear something about going forward, and that is that the sheriff would like to expand their eligibility list for recruitment. This is the second time you've heard this in the last 9 months. In the last go round, the sheriff was able to recruit, I believe, 9 applicants. A couple of them didn't make the grade. A few of them were hired by somebody else, and the remaining candidates were deemed unacceptable, and the sheriff wants to start over. So to do that, what we will do probably at the next meeting is have a resolution that would terminate the old list. There's only a couple of people left on it, and start a new one. And if that's the case, that will come through this committee to the county board as well. And that's it from Judiciary and Law. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Quinn, Planning, Resources and Development.
Thank
There
you. We met yesterday morning, and pretty much business as usual, other than the items we talked about earlier. We did have a discussion about reviewing the process and procedures for a new subdivision ordinance. Answered some questions and talked about how we, reminded ourselves about what the implementation of that looks like. In particular, that was important because we expect there may probably be a subdivision request coming up later this winter or spring. And we want to be prepared to manage that in the most appropriate way. Also, Ann reported that she is finding time to pick up on the process of the comprehensive plan. That's about it.
Thank you. Supervisor Morehouse, Health and Human Services. You're muted, Diane.
Sorry, everybody. I thought that I had pushed the button. Health and Human Services Board last met on January 27th. We had our usual business as usual reports, excellent report from Veteran Service. The Health Department reported on the current COVID status, still at critically high level, and not much progress on vaccination at 47%. KT informed the board that they're now following end of January, new DHS guidelines regarding contact tracing, which essentially involves maximizing any kind of prevention and mitigation strategies to those that are going to yield the most positive results. The Omicron variant spreads so rapidly that it's just not feasible any longer to do the kind of standardized case interviews with every single contact. So the health department is not doing extensive contact tracing. Instead, they're going to be focusing their contact tracing resources on congregate living situations, hospitals, schools, nursing homes, and so on, and directing attention to people who are at and in situations who are at high risk of getting the disease. The good part about that is that it means that resources can then be devoted to kind of normal, if there is such a thing anymore, public health functions, and to communication strategies about the continuing importance of vaccination and masking and strategies and requirements for isolation and quarantine. So it gives our health department some breathing room, I think, and is recommended by the delivery experts. And then Chris Corpola used her report to inform the board that she is retiring in early August. After we all said, no, you can't, we don't accept it, you can't leave. We talked about our statutory responsibilities in retaining human services director, talked about the board's interest in being a participant in that process. And at the committee's request, Supervisor Steen and I met on Monday with Heather and laid out some strategies and some recommendations that we will bring back to the committee at our next meeting on the 24th. And other than reviewing December vouchers, that was the extent of our meeting. Thank you. It's my report.
Thank you. Supervisor Johnson, the neighbors of Dunn County.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The neighbors last met January 20th. The committee was provided with quality assurance steering committee updates. We were also updated from the safety committee. It was reported that there's 8 new hires, 12 resignations. We also discussed the lost time due to COVID related issues. Administrator Meyer discussed the CNA program. There were very few admissions because of the COVID situation and the help situation. Administrator Meyer discussed census at the end of December, and it was at 91 of a high of 96. Arrowhead and Fireside remain closed. The facility is taking admissions to the outer buildings at this time on our current staffing levels to ensure residents' needs are met. Not able to admit all houses due to COVID staff. Administrator Meyer discussed the IDR process of citation reviewing during the look back survey. And we had a COVID update. Increase on COVID positive staff was discussed. And we also discussed the vaccine mandate. And our next meeting will be February 17th. And that's all I have. And thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor McCullough, Transit and Highway.
Thank you, Chairman Bartlett. I'm going to be considerably more verbose than I normally am because we have a lot on our plate at the moment. I will go with transit first, which was actually fairly routine operations. We are still anticipating the delivery of the electric buses and all of the infrastructure to go with that, as well as the solar grant that will help us power those buses. So that's everything that's fairly routine there. On the highway side, we have had a lot on our plate and have a lot going forward. We had a special meeting on the 27th, as well as our regular meeting this morning, and then we'll have another special meeting in 2 weeks. And so I will go through that stuff fairly briefly the special meeting on the 27th. Was to discuss some issues with Lumen Technologies, which are the people who bought out CenturyLink, and they have been refusing or failing to relinquish right of way for roadway, and not just for us, but all through the state. So the state of Wisconsin has recommended to municipalities and counties that given Lumen's failure to cooperate, municipalities and counties go ahead with the condemnation process for right of way for utilities, and we authorize the beginning of that process. So that covers the special meeting. Today's regular meeting, among the things discussed, it looks like the highway shop needs a new roof sooner rather than later. That's been on our radar for a while. There have been more leaks and some damage from those leaks. So we are looking at getting an assessment of how much that's going to cost and looking into the cost, how we're going to pay for that. In addition, today's meeting, we approved a process for hiring a new highway commissioner involving an open search conducted in-house by HR and with the cooperation of the highway committee. We also on our agenda had a discussion of Arpa funds and possible uses for some of that in a highway context. We talked very briefly about that, but most of that discussion was deferred to the upcoming special meeting, in part because with the federal bipartisan infrastructure bill, we have some once in a generation, possibly once in a lifetime opportunities to get federal and state funding for some local roadways at the 80-20 match rate. Much of that will be happening next year, but there are some opportunities this year for resurfacing, repave, mill and fill kind of jobs, the things that require minimal engineering, basically minimal design studies. So we are going to be discussing what funds we might allocate to a quick baseline planning process for any potential repavement opportunities coming up. And again, it's a very, very rare chance, and we would like to take advantage of that, of those federal and state dollars. In addition, when we are discussing possible uses of some ARPA funds on the highway side, one of the things that we talked about is the replacement schedule for the truck fleet. It is very cost ineffective to replace trucks on a much longer than a 10-year basis. We have some trucks that are going on 20, 21 years old. And as they get older, the repair costs rapidly mount up till it starts to be more expensive to repair the old trucks than buy new trucks. So we are looking at possibly requesting some ARPA funds for updating the truck fleet so that we can keep that on a regular rotation. It had gotten badly out of that regular rotation. So I think that is everything I have on my list. If Chair Bartlett has anything, or Chuck or Brian has anything to add to that, feel free, but I think I got it all. And that is my report.
I think you did a good job summing that up. Thank you. Any questions for anybody? Not? Thank you. Moving on to item 11. Moving into closed session. So I need a motion and then I need a roll call vote. Supervisor Steen moves, Supervisor Johnson seconds. Mr. Miller, will you take the roll?
Certainly. Supervisor Steen,
Yes.
Supervisor Headland,
Yes.
Supervisor Anderson,
Yes.
Supervisor Maves,
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson,
Yes.
Supervisor McCullough,
Yes.
Supervisor Morehouse,
Yes.
Supervisor Tripp,
Yes.
Supervisor Quinn,
Yes.
Chairman Bartlett.
Yes.